how you know you're a real YouTuber, right? When you start paying people for ads. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Christopher Ruocchio. I'm the author of the Sun Eater Science Fantasy series, and I am joined this evening by my friends Liam from Liam's Lyceum and Jordan from iWizard. Gentlemen, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah. So the agenda for this evening, of course, my second book, Howling Dark, is out in trade paperback. And rather than, I said this last time, but I'll say it again, then have everyone come on and talk about how good or not that book is, because that'd be a weirdly totalitarian thing to do. I thought instead we would talk about Cyberpunk and how it's totally fake. It's not real. You've all been lied to. It's not a genre. And we're gonna argue about that. I'm gonna be a little bit shitposty about this because obviously, everybody acts like it's a genre, but it's not. It's not a genre. I'm not even sure science fiction is a genre, but that's a big pill. So I'll save that one for later. I don't really know how to start this one because it's obviously just me making a joke. But how do you guys feel about Cyberpunk in general? I guess we'll start there.
How do we feel about it? I mean,
Yeah, what's your favorite work of Cyberpunk? It's not really your thing, Liam, right?
I mean, I read a lot more fantasy and sword and sorcery in particular. Cyberpunk is fine, I think. I haven't read that much. Okay, I think it's fine. But my favorite Cyberpunk thing might be Ghost in a Shell.
Yeah, same.
Which is just, I only watched it last year because we were talking about it, and I was like, oh yeah, I should check that out. But I like the story novel rather, 36 Streets by T.R. Napper, which is, I think, came out last year, so that was pretty good actually. But yeah.
Okay, I sorry, I've been dealing with audio problems. I have no idea what's causing them.
One sec, guys. I think I have feedback problems. Do you guys hear the feedback? It might be
having technical difficulties. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have earbuds in, Jordan? That might help.
Everything.
I don't have earbuds in, but let me.
I didn't change anything
make that happen
from last time. Everything was the same, and now nothing works.
Oh. Can you hear us, Christopher?
You guys hear me?
I can hear you.
One second, guys.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I just can't hear you. Okay.
Should I leave?
That's cool.
Let's see.
Okay. I'm not a tech guy, so this is going to get real embarrassing real fast. All right. Sorry, everybody. This has never happened before. Okay. Can you hear me now, Jordan?
1 second. I'm trying to make sure I can hear you through these new headphones. 1 sec. I'm almost there.
Can you hear me now, Christopher?
Yeah, I've got you, Liam.
Okay.
All right. Maybe it was a confluence of factors because I was getting a lot of noise for Jordan. Clearly, somebody hacked us, and they were just trying to make us live the experience.
It must be one of those cyberpunks.
It must have been one of them. Yeah. So, I'll repeat this when Jordan gets back. But in order to salvage, the conversation and my dignity here, Cyberpunk started out as not a genre, right? But as a group of people. And this is the thing that sort of bothers me, is that a lot of these little tiny genres that pop up in science fiction and fantasy that aren't genres are really like movements. They're like artistic schools, right? The Cyberpunks were like literally a bunch of dudes from Seattle who like were kind of writing in the same vein, right? In the same way that like steampunk was not Goths and Brown, right? It was like three guys. It was Jeter and Powers and Blaylock, and they were like, we're going to write reactionary neo-Victorian literature, and somehow that turned into steam cyborgs. And so like I wanted to talk to you, and I wanted to talk to Jordan because you are sort of a historian of the field, Liam. to an extent, and Jordan he's an English teacher, right? And so like I don't think any of these things are genres. I think they are these little episodes. Jordan, I was just talking about how like Cyberpunk originally was like a school of people, right? Like it was Gibson and it was Sterling and it was a few other writers up through like Neil Stephenson was like the last Cyberpunk, and then he like went on to be Neil Stephenson, right? And like a lot of these movements are like groups of people, right? Or a lot of these genres are groups of people. Grimdark is like Joe Abercrombie and people who write like him. And like, sure, there are people who wrote Grimdark before Joe Abercrombie, but to call them Grimdark is like an anachronism, right? It's like to go back into the past and say, this is Grimdark now because we made it a thing like after the fact. And I personally am frustrated with like how we talk about genre in science fiction, because a genre is biography, right, or fiction, right, in general, or romance to an extent, right, is a kind of story. But like science fiction can do like all these things, and so like I'm picking on Cyberpunk because it's like the flavor of the week here. Since it's Howling Dark is out, and Howling Dark has a cyberpunk flavor to it in places, but like this is true of most of them. Like we sort of talked about this with the space opera stream last week, right? Like it's not clear where the borders of a lot of these genres are because they aren't genres, I think, personally, and I don't think they have borders because you're dealing with something that's like super porous, right? And they're all science fiction stories to an extent too, right? So like what do you think about this?
Can you guys hear me? Does my mic sound okay?
The mic sounds okay, except there's a lot of noise at the same time. So like your words come through a little bit after the mic stuff.
Holy moly!
Yeah, you're very on brand for the weekend. So
This is true.
So I should like change something about my mic.
yeah, there's like a weird hissing thing that happens before you start speaking, and then your speech like lags a little bit behind.
Okay, all right. Just give me 1 second, guys. Go ahead and digress on this. Just give me one second.
Right. Well, I was thinking we could probably look at like what the heck a genre is in the first place, anyways. And you kind of like took the words out of my mouth, right? I was going to say, how dare you, Christopher? I was going to say that like Grimdark is like just Abercrombie and fantasy, or whatever, right? And so like, I mean, cyberpunk, yeah. I mean, I guess if you look at what genre really is, it'd be something like what you mentioned. I mean, you could say like epic, you could say prose itself is a genre. Which is weird, right? Or like
Sure.
or like novel. The novel is a genre, right? Short story, if you want, right? I mean, and so sci-fi would be, I mean, generally, I mean, we say that's a genre, but at the same time, we see like speculative fiction as like a super genre. And so if that's super, then what's smaller? Well, sci-fi is smaller, right? And then you'd have a subgenre, which I guess we would say is cyberpunk, right? But you have a good point about it being a movement, though I don't know of anyone that has like any neural laces in their brain. Personally,
they're all LARPers. Yeah, all cyberpunks are LARPers.
Yeah. I mean, it comes out from that beatnik type thing, right? That was in like the 50s. But I mean, I don't know, punks that like hacking. I guess that could be a cyberpunk. That's that in the story Cyberpunk by was it better? Bruce? That is better.
Yes. We got you.
Okay.
But in the story, Cyberpunk, I think it's by Bruce Bethke or something like that. It's basically what they are. They're just punks that like hack stuff. That's essentially.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of meta question that you guys are asking, and you're right. The term was first coined by Bruce Bethke, who's actually published a short story called Cyberpunk in 1983 about early computer hackers, and it wasn't until Gardner Dozois used the term in the Washington Post a little bit later that, and I talk about this in my fantasy and sci-fi literature course with my students. Is there
Jordan? It's starting to hiss again.
Is it really?
Yeah, man, I am so sorry.
All right.
Man, I am sorry.
Talk to each other.
Do you have another mic, maybe like a
And this is
worse
like
one?
a nice mic. Let's see. One second.
This is officially my most cursed stream. Sorry, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. But yeah, I'll guess we should let Jordan return to his point when he gets back. I feel really bad.
Yeah.
Oh man, keep Facebook open so he can message me if he needs to. But yeah, no, I think that we like I think we as like science fiction fans, right, or I guess capital F fans in general, right, have started to like use words differently than their like original academic kind of intent, right? And I think genre is probably the most abused word in sort of the nerd lexicon. In a lot of ways, because basically every convention panel in some way is about like a subgenre and like what its boundaries are, which I find, as Liam knows, I find immensely tedious. I find most convention panel topics painful, and since most of them are like, what is horror? It's like everybody knows, bro, right? It's like Justice Potter's definition of porn. Like I know it when I see it. It's really frustrating, but yeah, no, anyway, I'm sort of
No, it definitely seems tedious and arbitrary at times. So we could just end the stream now. I mean, like.
Yeah, we're done. Goodbye. All right, we'll take some questions. Jordan will be confused when he gets back.
But no,
yeah.
you have a good point, right? Because then like Cyberpunk, I think you described it as kind of like a fluid thing, right? Like part of a movement, right? Because even in Cyberpunk, you basically have, what do you have? You got a movie, at least, and was it 82? I think Blade Runner came out.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And then the story Cyberpunk came out around the same time. It was like 81, maybe 82. Neuromancer came out 84. You have stuff before that that's like kind of proto Cyberpunk. I mean, like, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which I did read and prep for this, and I watched Blade Runner. But they're
awesome. What did you think, by the way? I love that book.
I really like the book. It's not Cyberpunk.
It's not though.
It.
Yeah. I mean, neither really is the movie, right? The movie is like way more noir than it is anything else.
Yes.
Which is like, this is a whole other problem that Orion wants me to get into about Cyberpunk, which is that there's like no punk in it. Jordan, how we doing?
Good. I'm trying to.
We did it.
We did it?
Wait, maybe. Nope. It just started hissing again. You sounded great for one sentence.
You always come in very clean sounding, and then it starts like a little static. I don't know if it's feedback or something, but.
1 second.
What is, man, I feel so bad.
I just did Zoom with my wife, and it sounded perfect for both of us.
Yeah, you sound like an Imperial probe droid at the moment, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But
I mean, all right, input. Got the mic selected, external headphones. Switch to computer mic. All right, okay.
It started when Christopher had the problem with the system, right?
Yeah, it's all my fault.
Yeah. All right. Does it sound better?
You sound better, but I am now echoing. Like I think my speakers, my voice coming out of your speakers is playing back now.
Holy moly!
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. It's that 45-minute nap.
Yeah.
That's what got you.
You gotta love tech.
Yeah. Nope, we lost him again. But anyway, yeah, I guess we can get back to the like it's not really punk thing, right? Belemers is saying Neuromancer had a lot of punk, in a dystopian world as opposed to like,
Mm-hmm.
but it also stops being punk like halfway through. I said this last week, because like Case starts working for the man, and
Yeah.
actually like most of these stories, right, Ghost in the Shell is about the police, right? So
Yeah.
it's unclear to me how much of it, at least the seminal works, right, are really that punk, right? Now maybe I've never read any of Bruce Sterling stuff, to be perfectly honest, so maybe like some of it's there, but like I just don't know. I think it's sort of wrongly named.
Probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
the echo's back.
yeah.
That goes
goes-
back.
Yeah. There.
So guys, I'm just logged in. Like this mic is no longer hooked up.
Yeah.
Operable.
Yeah.
Wait,
I'm speaking
no.
through my iMac microphone.
I have no idea. Holy cow, Jordan! I am so sorry. Liam, are you hearing me echo too, or is this
I'm
like
hearing
a?
the echo.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's coming through Jordan.
It's just when
I
I'm
don't know.
present in the room, you hear it?
Yes.
I don't
Okay,
hear-
one
yeah.
second.
It's kind of confusing. Is there like a way that for some reason our audio is not going through your earbud? It's going through your computer.
It's not. It's not.
Okay. You don't hear us like okay. You just only hear in here.
Through my earbuds. No, I don't.
Huh.
1 second.
Is there a room to test this in StreamYard?
Yeah. Zin is saying the voices are coming out of your speakers and feeding into your mic, apparently.
Okay.
All
All right, let me take care of this.
right.
That is a pain.
F's in the chat.
Yeah,
lad.
that's in the chat for Jordan there.
Paul, thank you. Thank you for the dollars. Very kind. But yeah, so
So
anyway.
you're saying that it has an aesthetic, but the term punk doesn't fit.
Yeah,
You're
and
right.
I
They're
think
not
they were
punk all the
called
time.
the cyberpunks because those guys like broadly were punks, right?
Yeah.
Like Gibson was in his day, right? It's always funny, right? We're talking about people who are in their 70s now, but like time runs down. So, but I think it's because really what we're talking about is this like group of people that the label is what it is, right? Because especially when you start looking at the spin-offs, right? This was explicitly the case when Tim Powers and Blaylock and Jeter coined the term steampunk, right? Was they were like, those guys are the cyberpunks. Well, I guess we might be the steampunks, right? Because they wanted to write this sort of Dickensian fantasy lit, and they were like college students, right? And Philip K. Dick was crashing on their couch, which is a real story. But like all the other ones, like there's nothing like what is punk about hope punk, right? It's being like I don't even know anyone who's writing it, but like all these like later punk genres, like they don't have anything to do with punk, right? They're just LARPing.
I mean,
right? They're stealing Orion's culture.
There's punks in these stories a lot, but it's not the main characters. Or the main characters are kind of punks, but yeah, it's like you said, they're working for the man at that point. I mean, that's the story, ideally, right? Which is interesting. Another interesting topic, because who is the man in Cyberpunk, right? It's generally this corporation, I guess, and not a government. But
right, yeah, the government's usually absent or collapsed explicitly in the case of like Snow Crash, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of this, right? Which fact check, true. But welcome back.
All right, it should be working.
Do I hear myself?
It sounds good to me.
I do not hear myself. We've done it. All right, we're back. All right, we're back, boys.
We're back,
All right.
baby. Okay. 20 minutes in. Thank you, Jordan, for joining us.
I'm so sorry.
No, man, it's okay. It's okay. It's this was all performance art. Thank you for playing along, everybody. We got them to drop some F's in the chat for you. As it's tradition.
The respect worked, I think.
Yeah, but anyway, before the chaos happened, Jordan, we were talking about how these like this genre specifically started out as like a group of people, right? And I think a lot of these little genres that like everyone, especially the ones everybody gets really obsessed with, which is why I was picking on Grimdark too, because it's like the thing right now, are really like a group of people who like really get into and known for this thing for like a decade, and then the genre moves on, and then it becomes this like to write cyberpunk now is really to ape the aesthetic of William Gibson in the 80s more than it is to like do anything else, right? And there are previous books like we're talking about Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which predates cyberpunk, that gets called cyberpunk in part because of Blade Runner, but like as this active anachronism.
Right, because it influenced cyberpunk in some ways.
Right.
I suspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
yeah, and I think you see this like all the way up to like science fiction, right? Because people erroneously and hysterically call Frankenstein the first science fiction novel when it's like not. She's a romantic, right? Like maybe a gothic writer, but she's not. She's not. Science fiction doesn't exist yet. You're making this class. You're doing time travel to like categorize a book, right? And there are also
Yeah.
like earlier books that like look like science fiction. So like we do this, but we do this all the time. And this is just one of my big bugbears. And I guess I basically just thought we could complain about this for a week because I or for for this week because I broadly felt that the two of you probably agree on this at least to like some degree. And so Liam and I were trying to talk about like what a genre is in the first place, and I thought who better to ask than Jordan because he is an English teacher and a good one. So
yeah, I think there's a tendency to just call all of these things quote unquote genres when things like golden age sci-fi or new wave or steampunk or space opera, when really they're all just labels that correspond, I think, sometimes to different things. Like the new wave, I think cyberpunk in some ways was a movement at the very least. And I would say that it's an enduring aesthetic at the very most. I definitely lean towards calling it, I think, an aesthetic. And I didn't hear all of what you guys were talking about. I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but I would say that cyberpunk is an aesthetic. But that doesn't imply, I think, that it's thin or insubstantial or that it's ephemeral or that there isn't a lot of meat on the bones. Aesthetics are incredibly powerful. I'm sorry to say, but right now aesthetics are more powerful even than ideas. And I say that descriptively, not normatively, without any relish. I just think it's sadly descriptively true that aesthetics are more persuasive, more powerful, and more sort of beguiling to people right now than ideas. And if you want to transmit ideas and do it well, you have to wrap your ideas in the right aesthetics, in a compelling aesthetic. And cyberpunk is an important mode of delivery, I guess. When you read or watch cyberpunk, it always has something to say. But the reason I call it an aesthetic, and to your point, Christopher, and not a genre or a subgenre per se. So interestingly enough, this is such a niche argument, but we agree on this, Christopher, is that there's a very precise definition of genre that I hold to. And it's essentially that plot plus character plus setting plus style or form equals genre, meaning that when it comes to a movie or a comic or a novel, there are going to be variations in each of these elements, and these elements are going to add up to create, in the end, a distinct category. Think of typical film genres: comedy, drama, horror, what else? Mystery, westerns, sci-fi. With all of these genres, you're going to have something that's uniform about each of the elements that I mentioned. And you don't need all of them, but you need most of them. It's very easy to explain to people, for example, how comedies differ from genres. I mean, gosh, this goes all the way back to Aristotle with comedy and tragedy. The plots of comedies are entirely different from dramas. The style's entirely different. The characters are different. The settings are usually different, but not always. Though at the very least they feel different. But when it comes to something like cyberpunk, of all of the elements that I mentioned, there's really nothing uniform that you could say applies to all cyberpunk stories except for the setting, right? The setting is going to be oftentimes this gritty, rainy, neon, multicultural, corporatized, highly atomized, often urban, but not always urban, vision of the future. And of course, there are going to be some exceptions and differences. It's very difficult to compare like Tron, say, to like Blade Runner, but it's going to take place usually in the nearish to to medium near future, right? It's not going to take place usually a million years from now. It'll be somewhere between 50 years, maybe at the least, and maybe 20,000 years in the future. I know that's the case for your book, Christopher.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'm kind of the outlier, I think, in that regard.
But notice it's not in the past. It's not 5 years from now. It's not a million years from now. But with Cyberpunk, there's no type of story or plot that it needs to have. There's only a type of aesthetic. There's only a type of setting that it needs to have. There's no type of character that it needs to be. There's no type of style that it needs to have, right? And I'm already hearing pushback, right, from people who, and I'm bringing up the comments now just to make sure there's no pushback. No, I'm just kidding. I think people will say that there is a style in Cyberpunk. There is a type of character. There is a type of plot. And first of all, I would argue, no, there really isn't. But even if it feels that way, I would say this mostly reflects, if it feels like there's a style, if it feels like there's a cyberpunk plot, if it feels like there's a cyberpunk character, this reflects the extent, I think, to which a lot of cyberpunk stories and that aesthetic, it borrows from other real genres like noir detective fiction. So if it feels like cyberpunk is a specific type of character, it may be that it has a noir detective type of character, right? Cyberpunk borrows from noir, it borrows from techno thrillers, it borrows from dystopia, it borrows from urban crime fiction and that sort of thing. And notice too, Christopher, by the way, just lastly, that there is an ever expanding list of something punk stories.
Right. We were getting into this while you were disappearing. Yeah.
That people are claiming are all literary subgenres. And to your point, they're really not. There's post-cyberpunk, there's biopunk, there's nanopunk, there's diesel punk and atom punk and steampunk. And people are telling me now that there's elf punk, whatever that means, and that sort of thing. So, you know, I'll leave it at that. But I think it's very easy to make the case that cyberpunk is not so much a genre, but an aesthetic, and that you can apply that aesthetic to whatever genre that you want to put it in.
Yeah, I broadly agree. You know, I go so far as to say that I think science fiction and fantasy almost are in a similar boat, but definitely I think cyberpunk is. The other thing we were talking about when we were gone, just to catch you back up, is the sort of the sort of personal angle here, right? Like it was a group of people, you know, at a certain time, and we talked about, you know, talking about the other punks too, right? Steampunk, when it started out, you know, it was Tim Powers, it was K.W. Jeter, and it was, oh gosh, is it James Blaylock? I can never remember Blaylock's first name.
Yes.
Yeah. And they decided, right, if those guys up in Seattle are going to be the cyberpunks, then we're going to be the steampunks, and we're going to write, you know, neo-Dickensian literature, and that'll be our thing, which is not what steampunk means anymore, because like all of these labels, you know, they get run away with, right? But there's like a school, you know, in a place at a time, and you know, it's not, in, you know, nowadays there's this like weird like post Babel, you know, multiplication of genres every day, because the indie writers need to generate new search bisects, and you know, I got to be number one, so I got to create a new genre. Which, like, sure, like we all need to get those number ones, but you know, we end up, you know, now science fiction is a weird spot where they're like, there's no one thing happening anymore, right? There'll never be really another equivalent to like the new wave, right? Just because there are like 80 things happening at any one time. I don't believe there is like one. There used to be like the one fandom, right? Like all the way up through like the last 10 years, and now there are like 87 fandoms, and like tomorrow there'll be 312. Right. So like nobody knows what anybody's doing anymore. But there were these like there was this like group of people, and I think that because we were talking, I think this is while you were gone. We're talking about the punk label not really applying in a lot of those like other cases at all, right? And like not really in Cyberpunk's case because it's always cops, right? So like we don't want to, Orion's very upset in the comments. As a punk, the the orthodox punk, and but a lot of these new genres, they're just using that word as a suffix meaning genre, which is just so amusing to me. But I wanted to ask you, when you're talking about aesthetics being more persuasive, I agree with you. But you said like right now, I sort of think they're just always more persuasive to people. I don't know. I don't know how I could prove that, but that's just sort of a gut feeling that I have. Do you think there's something unique about here and now that makes aesthetics more persuasive to people? Is there a time when ethics or ideas were more persuasive?
I don't know. I'm kind of like making the Richard Weaver argument from ideas have consequences. That it has something to do with nominalism or something like that. There's a sense in which modern people are not good at thinking in abstractions, but are only willing to think in particulars. And I don't know. I think just in my experiences, 10 years as an educator and now, several years as a podcaster and a YouTuber, people aren't very good at, and here I sound like a total elitist, but I found that aesthetics are somehow more persuasive, that there's a kind of cult of cool, that I think there's a sense in which, most of my friends, to the extent that they have a certain politics or they have a certain sort of life philosophy, a lot of times it has less to do abstractly with the rightness or wrongness of the idea of the axioms, of the abstract axioms or philosophical ideas, and it has more to do with a certain sense of identity and who they want to be seen as and who they want to be seen as being, and less with the sort of logical rightness, a kind of teleology or anything like that. It has a lot more to do with who do I want to come across as being, what's the term from existential philosophy, being for others. The being for others, Sartre defined it as existing in and through the imagined subjectivity of the other, meaning what people tend to do is not think about what's really true and what they really believe, but what they want other people to see them as believing, how they're reflected in other people's eyes. That's what people care about. And so I think that's one of the reasons that aesthetics are so incredibly powerful. I could be wrong about that. Maybe that's just the elitist in me speaking, oh, I'm able to engage in abstract reasoning and other people aren't. But it's just been my experience that when I try to communicate using logic and logos and reasoning and abstract ideals, it's a real turnoff for people and they kind of shut off. But if you can kind of transmit this sort of aesthetic, this sense of, wrapping someone in that kind of, you can see how powerful aesthetics are. If you go on YouTube and you Google cyberpunk study music, just endless videos come up. And they've got these flashing neon lights, and there's a dude in a trench coat, and there's a flying car, and this cyberpunk music comes on, and these videos have millions and millions of views. And if you look at the comments, people are just like, "Oh man, I just want to be Rick Deckard, and I want to be, in his flat, and I want to be like having sex with this robot girl." You should read the comments; they're incredible. But I think people care about that more than ideas, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I say I think it's always true, right? Because I was thinking, and I'm going to be myself again, right? Of the way the Byzantines would persuade barbarian tribes to submit to the emperor, right? Just by bringing them to Constantinople, be like, look at this cool stuff we have. Isn't the Hagia Sophia amazing? Convert, pagan, and like very often that worked. I just that's not a compelling religious argument in 2023, but in like 781, like, oh boy, like that'd do it, right? Like, I do think, I mean, I think you're right. I think that people like have a vibe that they try to embody, right? Like I remember being in edgy high school where I'm like, well, I still wear all black, right? But I do I think I broadly agree with you. Liam, you have been silent. What do you think about the aesthetics question?
The aesthetics question.
Yeah.
Well, first off, I had a joke. I love logos. Anyways, that's a dumb philology joke. But thanks, Jordan, for setting that one up. The aesthetic question. Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say. I haven't studied aesthetics, actual aesthetics much at all. But Cyberpunk definitely seems to. Well, I mean, it's basically what has already been said, right? Neon, rain, trench coat, generally a cop.
Right, kanji, noodles.
Yeah. It's
That's a wrap.
Basically, Japan's got to be involved somehow, or close enough, right? China, maybe Vietnam.
Megacorps.
Yeah, Megacorps.
Yeah, the Japanese angle is funny, right? Because like that whole like period of history where it looked like Japan was taking over the world is like over, right? So like there's like this strange like retro future thing about going all Japan now. Whenever people do it, with much affection for the nation of Japan, right? Like it's not where it was in the 80s anymore, economically, right? So like,
and they're not having kids too. I mean, at all.
Yeah,
they're having negative kids.
That'll do it.
Anti-kids. No, that's a good point. And in fact, when I think of something like, I've read some of the Cyberpunk by T.R. Napper. He's Australian. And it's all pretty recent stuff, like all from the last 10 years or so. And Japan's not in it, essentially. It's all China.
Sure.
Which maybe, echoes more of a modern, sense of what the world looks like.
Yeah,
right.
Especially
that 50 years from now, China rules the world and the United States doesn't exist or something like that, right? I mean, so, and there's a second Vietnam War. Right. So, I mean, it does have this. And because of that, actually, it does have this particular like 80s like thing. I didn't live in the 80s, but it kind of feels like the 80s, maybe 90s for some of the other stuff too, of course, right? But you got like 80, isn't it 82? Isn't that when Blade Runner came out?
Up to I think like so,
83.
83, okay. Early 80s, and then up to like 88 or something is when Akira came out. So like you just got this decade of cyberpunk right there. Hey, look, it's Akira.
Yeah, Blade Runner was 82.
You win.
Oh, I win.
Fact check. You've been Snopes to Jordan. Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to this. I mean, we were asking this question. We said, okay, it's probably not a genre. Technically, if we want to like get down into the nitty gritty, and you and Christopher were talking about the fact that there were these people that were trying to start this movement. So you could look at cyberpunk as a movement. If it's a movement, then it's got to have certain assumptions that it's putting forth and certain philosophical and political bones to pick, I guess.
I think it does with like the early guys, right? I think there's an explicitly sort of well, like punk culture sort of anarchic left-wing bent to like Gibson and Sterling in particular.
Yeah.
The one Sterling story I have read is, I can't remember the title, but it's about an Islamic guy who's come to America and he's going to infect I think the future president, because they've like done some like computational analysis to figure out who that's going to be with a virus, and they deliver this virus by having him snort cocaine through like a $1 million bill with Ronald Reagan's face on it, right? Like it's like I don't remember the title or anything except like that was the point of the story, right? Was that one symbol, right? And like that's pretty clear. I do think there, at least early on, is this sort of sense, but this is why I was sort of laughing at how like even Neuromancer like stops being punk halfway through when we have to like save the artificial intelligence from the one faceless bureaucratic entity to give to the other one so that it can contact aliens. I want to know more about the aliens. Like, why did it never went that way? But I digress. But like, and Ghost of the Shell is about the police, like we said that earlier, right? And I was going to say, earlier, right? Like at this point, right? Like now anybody who writes is like sort of appropriating the the aesthetic, right, and to a certain extent the ethics of that sort of 1980s cyberpunk stuff, which means they're all LARPers. To which I wanted to set up Orion's comment here. Ask a cyberpunk if they've ever bricked a cop car. They have not, right? Maybe in the 80s William Gibson did. I'm not sure. He got up to some things, but I think those things were mostly drugs. But like everyone's sort of like to write cyberpunk now is largely to like go back in time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is not actually a forward-looking genre in a lot of ways, and I'm not dinging them for that, right? Fantasy is not forward-looking kind of at all, right? It's you don't have to be forward-looking. That's fine. But I do think that it is largely this is why I say a lot of science fiction I think is basically fantasy, is that it stopped trying to do what like the hard science fiction writers are trying to do when they write science fiction, what Gernsback was looking for, right, when he started his magazine. And that's like stories about cutting edge science and what the future might be like. Like I don't think that is the point of cyberpunk at all anymore, right? I think that might have been what they were trying to drive at in their time and place, but like I think it's the fate of a lot of these movements and to become museum pieces. And I broadly think that cyberpunk, if it's not an aesthetic, right, when it's not just an aesthetic, is a museum piece. Because I think it's broadly addressing the like concerns of the Reagan era, which is 100 years ago. And so anyway.
I think that there's a certain type of person that will act like all cyberpunk stories level the same type of ideological critique, and my answer is that that's not really true at all. You have some cyberpunk stories that are anarchist, some that operate according to leftist assumptions, some that embed libertarian or even traditionalist critiques. I mean, just look at the number of cyberpunk novels that have won Prometheus awards. And there are many other viewpoints, right? So, some cyberpunk novels are critiquing state tyranny. And I think that's one of the things that has been effective about it is that, typically dystopia, right? The subgenre of science fiction that we like to call dystopia, Brave New World, 1984, Fahrenheit 451, you could go, the list goes on, is always a projection of a future in which some like Dr. Evil type with his pinky up to his mouth is running the government and is tyrannizing everyone and using state power coercively to oppress the people. And one of the things I think that cyberpunk does well is it extends that tyranny to the realm of corporate power. But it's not just corporate power, it's cronyism as well. It's the government getting in bed with big corporations and not being able to tell the difference between those two. So some cyberpunk is definitely critiquing or has something to say about state tyranny and oppression. But in a lot of cyberpunk stories, the focus is on corporate control and not enough government. I mean, just think about Bruce Sterling's Islands in the Net. Think about Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, where corporations and the mafia run everything, and even the most vital government agencies like the police and libraries have been privatized. Companies, pizza restaurants are allowed to murder their delivery boys if they don't deliver the pizza in 30 minutes or less. People carry around nukes and drive armored cars. But notice that even when Cyberpunk critiques corporate tyranny, there's almost always a critique of too much change too fast as well, and of the stultifying effects of too much technological progress. I was just watching a fun, sort of escapist, ridiculous cyberpunk story called Escape from New York. And
Classic,
there's so many stories like that have both, right? The government is corrupt and tyrannical and almost fascist. And also, they've created an entire prison city in New York, so you have a critique of evil government. But you also have most of the film exploring the horrors of what people are now calling a narco-tyranny. So you have, cyberpunk stories that delight in, that revel in transhumanism and limitless change. What James Poulos calls cyborg rapture. And then you have books like Christopher Ruocchio's Howling Dark,
Brought it back home. Yeah.
which is a really sophisticated critique of transhumanism and the sort of perversions of the body. A critique of this idea that we are infinitely malleable, and that because our selves are just these floating Cartesian minds, that we can augment the body however we want, as much as we want, and that there will be no consequences. And Christopher, I'm going to embarrass you right now, and I'm going to do it right in front of Liam, and I'm going to read a quote. Hey, you said this was about Howling Dark, so I brought a quote from your book, from the cyberpunk part of your book. You wrote this, Christopher. You can't hide from it. I'm going to read this right now. Listen.
I can, though.
You wrote it. I'm going to read it, Christopher. But we are not bodies. We have bodies. And though who we are is rooted in that animal matter, we rise higher, growing like a tree toward heaven. I can think of no greater evil, says Christopher Ruocchio, says Hadrian, than the insistence that we are only meat. How many lives have been demeaned, destroyed by that insistence? How many millions? That city, what it offered, suggested that we were nothing more. And so the men who traded in flesh, offering surgery, therapy, and replacement, offered people a vision of their best selves, as if identity were fluid, as if who we are is only granted to us by others and is by others taken away. So this is Hadrian talking about this idea of this like Gnostic, poetic sense of the self, and that we aren't, the union of matter and flesh. We aren't hylomorphic, as if no part of us is our own. I saw signs selling memories and offering dreams, selling experiences and emotions wholesale. Those buying such services imagined they improved themselves, when in truth it was their selves they destroyed, their souls, traded piece by piece for pieces unrecognizable, until, like the ship of the legendary Theseus, who replaced his vessel part by part until all of it was changed, they'd replaced all of themselves, and who they were born was dead. As a man who suffers a stroke is forever changed by the event, so too the complete transfiguration of the body was not the actualization or purification of the self, but a kind of death. Not the caterpillar becoming the butterfly, but the spider devoured by her own children. No mind can undergo such changes to the body and remain itself any more than an uprooted tree can make its home in hostile soil. What say you to that?
I mean, I'm right, though. But yeah, it is really, really hard for me to listen to my own stuff, though. People are like, have you heard the audiobooks? It's like about 5 minutes. I actually had to listen. I made myself listen to all of Empire of Silence, which was a very, very trying experience for me, because it was like 19-year-old me that wrote that book. And like, it's a very different experience for me. It's like listening to your own voice, on the phone, only it's someone else's voice, but it's your words. So, it's not. It's very, very strange, cyberpunky experience, to hear my voice possessing Jordan. But what
was going through your head when you wrote that? Like, it's so inspired. It's so interesting. It's such one of the things I love about your novels is that they're fun and they're they're rollicking adventures, and they've got all that sort of pulpy space opera goodness, but they're also novels of ideas. And so
Well, yeah, all the
we're
ideas
talking
for
about
aesthetic,
Howling
yeah.
Dark. What was the inspiration there, or at least like what sort of great, what do they call it, the great conversation of history? What conversation were you meaning to have in that story?
Well, literally that one, right? Because we're sort of pushing these questions right now, right? Elon Musk got the whole Neuralink thing coming out, which is like a really bad idea. It's just a terrible idea. I have a lot of sympathy, for people who need to use these sorts of things to like adjust for an injury, right? But there's a lot of people who are just running around saying like, "Want to be great." When I could just get like rocket boosters strapped to my legs, and I can get like robot claws, and like Adam Jensen in Deus Ex, I can get sunglasses implanted in my face, right? Like maybe you won't, develop some serious issues from having sunglasses implanted in your face. But like maybe, right, they'll short circuit and burn out your eyes, right?
That's Molly
then,
Millions, right? From Neuromancer.
yeah, she's got the like full eye contact lenses that are like permanently attached. Yeah. But you can't touch them; they'll smudge, right? Like, that how is that better exactly, right? Turns out I can just blink, Molly. Like maybe you have X-ray vision now or thermoptics or something, but like, guess they make goggles, right? You do not need to like permanently injure yourself to wear sunglasses, Adam Jensen. They don't even look cool. Okay, like I don't know what they were thinking with that part of the Deus Ex 3 design. I just don't get it. But like, but people are seriously considering doing all this stuff, right? I have a friend who was asked to give a talk at like a transhumanist society, which was funny because he's like the opposite of one, and they like, okay, I'm deeply concerned by people thinking that we should be making these choices and performing purely optative surgeries on themselves and having these things plugged into their heads. Now I get it if you like can't form long-term memories and you like maybe need some sort, and like if there's a machine that can fix that, cool, right? But the avenues for abuse with regard to especially right neurological wetware is just so frightening, right? The government already is in your cell phone. Do you really want them in your head? Do you want Facebook in your head trying to sell you, I don't know, shoes in your dreams? Like, no, you don't want that.
Yeah, there's
right?
a novel about this called Feed by M.T. Anderson. That's what I mean. It's technically a young adult book, but that's what it's about.
Yeah,
It's about the fact that you have this essentially this Facebook, this Instagram, this Twitter scrolling in your head now. And again, it's got that kind of Ray Bradbury theme that it's not actually the government that does it. It's people that do it to themselves to try to keep up with each other. And,
Sure.
There are girls going to like parties, and there's a new trend that suddenly flows into their internal feed. And so they actually go in to a bedroom and they will order like essentially Grubhub, DoorDash people will bring the new fashions to them like through the window as they're in the bedroom, and they will change into that so that they can be hip and trendy at the party when they walk out of the room.
Yeah.
I can kind of
Only
see
in
that
reality,
happening.
the new hip trend will be, kill yourself actually, because that is what Instagram is for. It is for causing teenage girls to kill themselves.
Well, that's what
and,
happens in the
pictures.
novel is that blisters become trendy, and girls start developing these blister. It's like it's so prophetic. You can already see this. I can see stuff with. I won't give any details, but I can see stuff like this happening with my students already.
Sure.
These very
Yeah.
trendy things that kids are doing to belong and to fit in that are really sort of irreversibly damaging to them.
Sure.
I'll leave it
Yeah.
at that.
Yeah, no, but yeah, no, these are real concerns, right? And like
Well-
when I was saying, that Cyberpunk is just a museum piece, right? It's not only that, right? Like I was speaking too strongly, because obviously, right, you can update these things, but there are I only mean that like there are aspects of the genre that have this sort of museum quality to them. The Japanese is like that's like a pretty clear one. This is this whole sort of theme that of genres or tropes becoming obsolete over time is something I've been thinking about a lot because I've been watching a lot of the old Batman the Animated Series from the 90s, right? And like this is a bit of a tangent, but like Dick Grayson's origin story like is impossible now, right? Like there is not like you're not going to get a kid who like is 10 years old like being forced to go through the circus, right? Like like it just doesn't happen. Like there aren't circuses like really anymore, right? So like where exactly was Robin in the circus? Like it's an artifact of the past in a certain way. And like I like really the next Batman reboot really should be set in the 1930s, right? Like it should not be set now. Like he's sort of become part of he needs to be left in his time and place, and like continuing to update him has caused all these problems. Like he's gotten like so rich that like only Bruce Wayne could be Batman, right? And like now the story doesn't make sense, in a way that it might have made sense back in its time. And in the same way, like there are these elements of Cyberpunk that I think like I mean new writers are shedding, right? Talking about Napper, picking the Chinese instead, right? But like that will also live its day and die, right? And so there, so this aesthetic like has to change and update itself, and there has to be a kernel, of relevancy that's beneath even the sort of aesthetic overlay, right?
Yeah.
Or you're only writing, retro future stuff.
Well, that's fun to read sometimes.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I mean, people love Fallout, right? To pick like a really like high profile example, right? But like nobody's, nobody's writing like ray gun, Buck Rogers stuff anymore. Although they should.
I'm sure there's someone out there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you'd be the one to tell me who it is. But
yeah, well, I'll get on it and find out for you. But no, I think it's interesting. You were going to bring up a point, Christopher. I know, but I haven't talked
go ahead,
for a minute,
please.
So no, sounds good. I had another joke real quick. I was gonna, my jokes are terrible. It's obvious, and I get them from somewhere else. But I wear shoes, so I'm not human. But that's my joke. I don't know. Anyways, and
sure.
Just this idea of right. It's tackling a topic of this dystopia, right? So there's not this. There are transhuman elements and other sci-fi things. Specifically what comes to mind actually is post-cyberpunk, or that's a whole, another can of worms, right? Probably, but the idea generally is that it's basically cyberpunk except for it's utopian rather than dystopian, right? So I mean, you can do other things with that, I guess.
Sure.
But generally, these transhuman things are part of that dystopia, right? You know what I mean? Like the extrasolarians, that's a dystopia. You know what I mean? Maybe not everything in the Sun Eater universe is, right, but like that obviously is. It comes off to the reader as one, right? And it probably should, right? Regardless of if you think that stuff is cool or not. I mean, because I think that stuff is cool. I mean, I think transhumanism stuff in fiction is cool.
It's
right?
cool.
It's
Right.
fantasy, right? It's just fantasy though, right? I mean, I write that stuff sometimes, and it's just fun. You know what I mean? But I realize it's fantasy. Like I like to watch this guy, Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur on YouTube, and he's got some really cool and interesting stuff. But he does this like transhumanism thing that he like really believes could like happen and like would be awesome and stuff like that. I was like, no, you're losing me, man. Like this is just total. You're in fantasy land now. I mean, like you might be in fantasy land on a ring world in space, but like it's still fantasy land. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I always like every time someone brings up the singularity, I just laugh. Like it ain't happening, bro. I am not a Kurzweil stan, right? But like you run into these people who are like it's happening tomorrow, and it's like, and you make fun of me for being Catholic, like, okay, let me know when the robot rapture happens. As we don't even believe in the rapture actually over here. It's made up. I saw someone talking about the leftovers a couple days ago. I'm like, yeah, that's not a thing. But that's neither here nor there. I've been like ignoring the chat terribly. But is Batman Beyond cyberpunk? It's certainly like.
That confused me for a second. That B and Beyond should be capitalized because I thought I was saying is Batman Beyond.
Cyberpunk. He's post cyberpunk. Yeah, good old Isaac. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's definitely got the aesthetic.
I forgot that was a thing, but yeah, it definitely seems to.
Yeah, I think I might watch that next because I never really watched through it, and I like Batman, so sometimes
Cyberpunk's cool,
it's sometimes that's all you need. There are a couple of good questions in here though. I didn't want to miss. Sharang says, what would be authentic modern day cyberpunk? What would you guys do? We've already read Christopher, but what would you guys do if you were writing a cyberpunk story?
What's interesting? Who is this? Sharang?
Yeah.
I think, and I'm interested. This is like kind of a nice jumping off point to a question that I have for you guys, because when you told me you wanted to get together and talk about cyberpunk, I was trying to think about why we like cyberpunk so much. So I almost think a more important question than the one that we've been asking might be, why do we like the cyberpunk aesthetic? Why are people drawn to an aesthetic experience that is so decadent, that is so degenerate and so over the top? And I know that the classic definition of cyberpunk is high tech, low life. Mm-hmm. I think a big part of why we're attracted to cyberpunk, and I would love to get your answers, guys, if you want to think about it, why we're attracted to cyberpunk is that it feels like, I don't know about you guys, I know this is kind of a political thing, it feels like we're already living in the world that cyberpunk predicted. Just look around you, right? These are not the clean, sterile lines of the gleaming utopian future that we were promised in a lot of these golden age sci-fi stories. We were told in the 1990s that the internet was going to bring us together. It's going to connect us. We'll be able to use it to hold governments accountable. That's what Facebook said about the Arab Spring. If you remember this,
sure. We
were told our gadgets would make life more convenient. They'd save us time. They'd free us up to live fuller, more meaningful lives. Our children would use technology to learn. I'm picturing every sci-fi film where some brilliant teacher on Mars, some Steve Jobs looking guy in a black turtleneck is at a seminar table zooming in on some holographic image while, bright-eyed children in Star Trek outfits are taking notes on their learning tablets. And that is not what the future is going to look like. Again, just look around you. People use the internet to watch porn, to play video games, TikTok videos, scrolling on social media. Kids are completely and totally addicted to their smartphones. They are reading, 7th grade students are reading at a 4th grade level. The average child is exposed to hardcore internet porn at the age of 12. And that's just the average. So that's messing them up. The food we eat is making us sick. Everyone's lonely and alienated and isolated, especially after the ruling regime became a biomedical security state. Nobody knows their neighbors anymore, especially in cities, Chiba City, right? So we distrust one another. Our cars are about to become self-driving because we cannot be trusted to drive because we're so busy texting and eating and drinking and driving to be trusted.
But we didn't get any Street Samurai, right? So
no,
we didn't get the aesthetics. Right?
No, we didn't.
We got all the bad parts of the
addled with drugs. We use drugs to sleep at night, to get up in the morning. We use drugs to have a good time and to come down from our good time. Our kids are taking drugs to pay attention, to be less anxious, to lose weight. We're taking drugs to have sex, right? So we're living in a cyberpunk dystopia. Inflation's out of control.
And
we have a migrant crisis.
Right.
I mean, there's almost nothing unifying us. Crime is surging everywhere. They're using robot dogs in Singapore, literally. And they're being made like a few miles down the road from me at Boston Dynamics. They're using them in New York City now. Robot dogs, like the mechanical hound from Fahrenheit 451. They're literally using robot dogs. Crime is surging everywhere. And there's just a perverse incentive structure and a shallow, depersonalized, disenchanted zombie quality about our culture. And most people I know, Christopher, I know you're big on talking about this, are either radical Gnostics or radical materialists, and there doesn't seem to be any in between these days. People are modifying themselves to no end, convinced that the real them is this ghost in the machine, and that the point is to carve and augment up their bodies until it matches this authentic, poetic, psychologized Gnostic self. Family formation is nothing. It's the worst it's ever been. Young people can't afford to have kids. They can't afford to buy houses. Anyways, I could go on and on and on. Like, this is a cyberpunk dystopia we're living in. BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and China own half of America. We're $34 trillion in debt. And amidst all of this, AI is now making it so that humans no longer have to use their brains or do anything.
Or can
And-
have jobs. Yeah.
And so if you're one of these people who is kind of awake to these realities, I'm telling you guys, it's impossible not to feel like you're in a cyberpunk novel right now. I mean, am I going crazy, guys?
No, I completely agree with you, as you know. And I'm gonna imitate Liam here and say, I have a joke, right? Are you saying then that like we read Cyberpunk so that we can be the Wojak of like the big brain face that's like covering, it's a mask over the crying face?
I sometimes
Just
feel like we read Cyberpunk because it makes us feel not alone in all of this. And it makes us feel like there's this one guy that has at least some modicum degree of sanity, like Rick Deckard. And he might be cynical, and he might be world weary, and he might be sort of, exhausted. But there's a sense in which like he's feeling our pain. And I don't know, there's something cathartic about reading it.
Huh. Yeah.
What do you guys think? I don't know.
Cyberpunk is the sword and sorcery of sci-fi. It's
In what way?
I've heard sword and sorcery is described as fantasy for turbulent times, right? And it's always like stick it to the man. The man is faceless sorcerer. It's corporations or whatever the hell it is in Cyberpunk, right? It's someone who's an individual that is basically seizing the day, I guess, if you want to be cheesy, and just doing whatever the hell they want, right? So like that's the idea. Generally in Cyberpunk, they're less what's the word? They're less wow, mind blank.
Heroic.
Yeah, less heroic.
That has
but
like
neither-
some
neither
added
are sword
like
and sorcery
connotative
guys.
value there. Yeah.
I mean, sword and sorcery guys are not very heroic either, though. Generally, I mean, they're heroic in a way, but they're very much on that gray area of black and
Maybe
white.
heroic in
So-
like a classical sense, right?
Yeah,
Like more
so-
an Achilles hero than like an
Yeah,
Arthur.
right. In Cyberpunk, I'd say maybe they're less enabled to actually get something done.
Yeah.
In sword and sorcery, you're more like, I'm just gonna go kill the sorcerer or the evil king. And in Cyberpunk, it's like, yeah, good luck.
Yes.
So, but there are similar aesthetics. Personally, that's how I feel, at least. So, and that's honestly, I might even go so far as to say that Cyberpunk might be my favorite subgenre. If we're gonna go and call it a subgenre, I know we already had this conversation.
Liam, betrayed me.
Of sci-fi, even though I haven't read a ton of it. Cyberpunk does this thing where we've already talked about it again. It's mostly a thing that 80s, 90s kind of parodies itself really quickly and then explodes. But yeah, I don't know. It still has some merit, and it's like Jordan said though, because it feels like we're in it. You know what I mean? But there's a point to these stories and these cyberpunk stories, right? I mean, whether that's they're often very emotional, right? There's some sense of like maybe not closure is not the right word, but like something to be gained emotionally, right? Doesn't always happen, but there's something there, right, that you want to fix. And if your world is like that, so let's just say our world, like Jordan said, is kind of cyberpunky anyways, you got to escape from it and then stick it to the man somehow, right? I mean, because most of us are not all right. We're not going to throw a brick at a cop car, but we could read about it, and we could write about it if you want. I don't know. Maybe
I think you made a really good point, Liam, that you didn't linger on very much, but I'm going to linger on it for just 1 second. You said something about the fact that, so one thing I noticed, to your point, when you read dystopian novels, oftentimes it is this screwed up world. Again, it's this Dr. Evil and this government cracking down on the people in different ways. In Fahrenheit 451, it's the firemen burning books, and the people kind of did it to themselves. They sort of lost a taste for their own freedom. They lost a taste for heterodoxy and exchanging viewpoints, and they decided to get into their silos and ban each other's books and all of that. And so you have the firemen burning books. 1984, Newspeak, the Newspeak Dictionary, this kind of totalitarianism that isn't utopian for the first time. It is just a boot stomping on a face forever. Brave New World, it is hedonism and decadence and controlling people by, doing it through overloading them with pleasure and things like that. But notice that in most dystopian novels, there's a big, bad, evil, giant, looming government, coercive government, and then there's this dystopian protagonist, this dystopian hero, and his group of companions that rise up to try to overthrow the government or fix the situation. What's interesting in Cyberpunk is I think you have a more sophisticated totalitarianism. You have a more sophisticated coercive set of institutions, a more sophisticated cronyist regime in bed with these mega corporations. And the main character realizes there's nothing he can do about it. One of the pieces of advice that I got like early on in my life was that what it means to be an adult is to realize what you actually can control and what you can't control. Sure. And so you made a point about the fact that in Cyberpunk, the protagonists are like resigned to the way things are. And that's kind of more real life. There's nothing that anyone can do about it. It's part of the zeitgeist. It's bigger than the protagonist. You can't just rise up and overthrow the government. That's so narcissistic. You are not capable of it. You're not brave enough. You're filled with soma, and you love soma, and you love your internet porn, and you love your little cam girls or whatever these cyberpunk protagonists are doing. You're not going to overthrow the government, you decadent Philistine. You're going to have your face stomped on, and you're going to have to find meaning in this corrupted, fallen, disgraceful world. And that's kind of what I like about Cyberpunk, is that it doesn't fill you with these illusions that you're just going to single-handedly like overthrow the system, because you're not.
Yeah, sure. Now, I'm gonna go. Bye. Yeah. But
Liam said it. It was his point first.
Yeah,
and
but
Liam's not wrong.
Right, but it is cathartic to sort of have those feelings in part because having like worked through all of those emotions, right? And like maybe this is why people love Cyberpunk. You can then have experienced all of that stuff, and then you can actually go and do something, right? Because you've processed all those emotions, you've gotten the woe is me, misery out of your system, and you can go do something, even if that is just, I don't know, throwing eggs at, people in the park, knocking bowler hats off people's heads, whatever it is the kids do these days. Yeah, no, I mean, it is a downer genre, but, and I do think we have a tendency, either as modern people or as people generally, to associate pessimism with truth, right? And so, on the one hand, you could make a case, right, that maybe the more heroic literature it's designed to give you false hope so that you may know your place and, have these silly aspirations that you may, just sort of, live inside of the rest of your life. But the real shit is being a doomer. That's the higher truth. But maybe just taking a closer look at, taking a reality check every now and then, right? And is good for everybody, because Cyberpunk also has this reputation as a literary genre, right? It's not it is not a pulp genre, right? It is not mere entertainment, to paraphrase Jules Verne. It is a genre for big brain smart people, right? Gibson is a writer's writer in a lot of ways, right? And he had a lot of respect and admiration from like the Academy in a way that most science fiction writers like don't have. And this movement has had a lot of greater legitimacy from the Academy than a lot of science fiction genres have had, which is an extra level to the dystopian cake, Jordan, because they are co-opting it and making the resistance a part of the apparatus. Boom. There's no escape, actually. Turns out Neo was working for the machines the whole time. And if Hugo Weaving hadn't found Control C, he would have died working for the machines. But Smith found the copy paste function, so we had to get through Matrix 3. Anyway, yeah.
Christopher, did you see?
I'm trying to match your energy, Jordan, and it doesn't come to me naturally.
Hey, I took a nap, Christopher. I just took a nap. I never get naps in, but I knew I was going to be doing this, so I took a nap. Did you guys see? Tell me honestly if you saw this. I saw this a couple of months ago, and I thought it would be relevant to mention here. Did you see the video? It was about 2 years ago, but it didn't really surface until a little bit later. And I saw it on Business Insider because I had a student that actually cited this in a paper, and I couldn't believe it. So I looked it up and I saw the video. And it was footage of a huge government drone flying over Shanghai, blaring the message out. And this was for people locked in their high-rise apartments during COVID. The drone said, "Curb your soul's desire for freedom and follow all restrictions." That was what the giant drone was saying as it was flying throughout the high-rise apartments, as people were opening their windows to get fresh air. Did you guys see that?
Yes. If it had been a blimp, it would be, like right on, the whole Blade Runner thing, but like, holy cow, right? We think we have the cyberpunk dystopia bad, here, but there are other parts of the world, where they have robot dogs. Although, Singapore at least does not get a D in infrastructure. So,
Well, New York City is starting to use the robot dogs too. I just found out that Eric Adams commissioned a bunch of these robot dogs. Apparently they're not going to do anything to anyone. They're just going to walk around and like say things to people. But like, I don't know. I'm still freaked out about it. Like,
yeah,
I'm not going there
right now. Right. I've read Snow Crash, right? There are robot dogs in that too. And they move like at like Mach 3. It's really bad news.
Don't trust the Roomba.
Yeah, right. You can't trust those Roombas. Okay, everybody laughs at me for that scene, but like that's where it starts. Right. Every now and then, the Roomba hits your ankle, and it's terrifying. It's bad.
It actually is. No,
it's not good. All right, my fear of the Roomba is perfectly justified.
Yeah. Can I go? Speaking of New York, real quick. No. I don't know if this is off topic. This is actually a story I read yesterday. Actually, you guys reminded me of two stories while you were talking. I read Coming Attraction by Fritz Leiber, which came out in 1950. But it actually got included in the big book of Cyberpunk that came out today, which is another coincidence. Phantom Liberty came out today as well.
Really?
And all part of the plan. Actually, I had no idea.
That's actually the man. He's in charge. But
right, he hacked my Neuralink.
We are just his pawns.
Oh, cool.
But Coming Attraction is it's not Cyberpunk. Obviously, it's 1950. It's just cool because it's 30 years before Cyberpunk, and it has some cool stuff. Like there's techno music in it. There's people. The very first scene in it is a car driving by a young woman and this Englishman who they hate on Americans and English people in this. It's hilarious. Well, it's Fritz Leiber, so he's just good anyways. But this car has hooks on it because it's trying to snatch skirts. The young punks drive around snatching skirts off women, and all the women in the United States wear masks. And they wrestle men, on TV and stuff. And you can watch this TV anywhere you are, basically, right? It's wild. It was a great story, in my opinion. Oh, and this woman has knives on her fingernails. That sounds very cyberpunk to me.
It literally is. Molly has she has the razor blades under her nails.
Yeah, and
in Neuromancer.
Gibson always cites Liber, so there it is.
That must have been it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a great story, really short. Another one I thought of though was A Strange Loop, I think is what it's called. It's by Napper again, and this is one though that like the character of the story doesn't do anything in it, right? He dies with dementia because he's a ding dong and he's controlled by like media and his poverty and stuff like that. But there's a guy that uses him in the story that does punch up a little, right? By using a virus. When this guy's selling his memory, he inserts a virus, so all the people that use his memory machines get amnesia, right? So that includes all the rich people, right? So someone punched up, it just wasn't the main character, which again is what came to mind. That was a few minutes ago. So.
I'm looking up this big book of Cyberpunk. I might have to get that. Take a look at it.
Yeah, I ordered it actually. I saw Liber was in it. I was like, hey.
Neil Stevenson, Bruce Sterling. All right, Cory Doctorow.
It's got that story in it that I identify as an attack helicopter or whatever, as well. So.
Who is that? Who wrote
and
that?
they didn't invite me.
I don't remember who wrote that, but it was pulled, I think, shortly after being written. So it's not published in many places, and it's called something else. It's called like Helicopter Story in this book. But
oh man,
yeah. Chat. I just want to apologize. I have not been keeping up with all of you very thoroughly during all of this. It's hard to talk to people and like do anything else at the same time if you're me. I am like a one-track kind of guy. But Jack, we sort of talked about the primacy of the individual when Liam was talking just there, right? Like that is sort of an element of cyberpunk, right? Or at least the atomization of the individual is like, is a big part of it. That sense of isolation, of loneliness, is sort of a pretty common element. And I think it gets that from noir. I think that's like really a noir thing. The noir detective is a man alone, in a lot of ways. He's not a policeman, right? He's like, parallel to the police, right? In some way. Private detective or something, or an ex-detective, or some kind of Ronin, right? And not a samurai. To use the lingo. But I think it gets that from its sort of noir antecedents. Let's see.
Yeah, that is. I would say that's one of the things. Who said that? Who made that?
Jack. I think it was Jack Myers who's asking about asked a question about the primacy of the individual being a necessary element.
That's one of the things that social psychologists and anthropologists and folks like Jonathan Haidt talk about, that I think makes cyberpunk a very Western genre. Cyberpunk takes place in Chiba City, Japan, right? But it's in a lot of ways a very Western genre. Jonathan Haidt calls this type of morality that we see in cyberpunk novels weird morality. So weird stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, meaning that there's a certain ethos, there's a certain moral matrix that you see in very individualistic, atomized, modern Western societies, countries in which people are very highly educated, high GDPs, have very few children, where it is all about me, myself, my goals, my dreams, my aspirations, my rights, my individual autonomy, my selfish gratification, the expression of my individual authenticity, expressive individualism. And Haidt contrasts this with sociocentric moralities. Sociocentric moralities emphasize like relationships, and who you are is essentially boiled down to the extent to which you're able to serve the group or the group's goals. And Haidt talks about, and this is in his book, The Righteous Mind, he talks about the fact that when you interview Western people and you ask them, who are you? Just write down a couple of sentences about who you are. Western people in Britain or America, or even Westernized like Asian countries like South Korea and stuff like that, and Singapore, they will say, I am an artist. I am a dreamer. I collect, manga, and I collect China dolls or whatever. And if you ask people from sociocentric cultures, like people in India, who they are, they will emphasize relationships. I am a father. I am a brother. I am an employee at this particular corporation. And they literally see the world differently. And so I do think that as much as Cyberpunk wants to make itself seem like it is this globalized, multicultural, sort of cosmopolitan, thing, I think it's a very Western genre or aesthetic and a very Western phenomenon. What do you guys think about that?
I had sort of a sub thought as you were saying all this, which is, do you think maybe that it is this, right, and that the sort of let's say foreign aesthetic, right, whether that's Japanese, Chinese, whatever, right, is meant to help sort of maximize the character's sense of isolation, right, in that like the world, at least, or maybe the audience's sense of alienation, especially in like 1984, right, is supposed to, well, certainly 1984 is feeding into like the anxiety about like, oh, is Japan going to take over the world, right? They've bought all this real estate, right? What is going to happen? Is my part of the world going to be unrecognizable to me, right? And I think it, at least in the 80s period, maybe to this day, right, is a sense of like, where am I going to be in a world that is going to completely leave me behind, right, as a person, right? And we see this, we're talking about like, all of the present day concerns that might be reflected, right, in like there, whole swaths of the country that are just sort of like left out of the sort of national conversation, right? Now those people have already, seen stuff change. Now in my own town, it's not, Japan that is like taken over, right? It's like Californians, right? Like I can't go anywhere in Raleigh anymore and see the South. I had to see that the South. I have to go in, across the county line. Like, I'm not saying that like people, shouldn't move here or something like that, but there is a loss there, right? Like the particular nature of the place where I was born no longer exists. I now I'm, my as my wife likes to remind me, her family has been here for 400 years. I am also a filthy Yankee. I remind her that I'm actually a half breed. I'm only half Yankee, but these this is happening at an astonishing rate, like all over the world, right?
Yes.
Places are globalizing, right, or Californianizing in some particular way, right? They're losing a lot of their local identity,
Yes,
and sort of diverse character. And I think that Cyberpunk reflects this, and I think that the sort of atomized individual hero is not just a noir carryover. I think it is partly speaking to this anxiety
Yes.
of the dissolution of place. And now maybe some of the
Yes.
writers don't, some cyberpunk writers don't care about that or something, right? But the aesthetic itself speaks to it, I think, in a way that even some writers are like, blind or deaf to.
Yes.
There's things act of themselves, right? Whether or not you have an intended meaning for them. Like you can't, you can only stretch these aesthetics or these genres or these story conventions so far before they become something else. And I don't know that this is something you can like actually get out of the cyberpunk, right? The Los Angeles of Blade Runner is like a very different place than the Los Angeles of 1982, right? Or even the Los Angeles of now, right? Which is like after Blade Runner is set by like 4 years. No pyramids, which is like lame, right? I didn't build one skyscraper pyramid, sucks. But like, in a lot of other ways, it's worse, right? But in a lot of other ways, it's not quite, the air isn't quite as bad as we thought it was going to be in 1982. But like it's still like it's not what it was in 1982 either. Like things change, and I think a lot of that change anxiety, which you talked about, I think both of you talked about, is a big part of the genre.
Yeah, and I think in some senses it extrapolates out from some of the warnings. I'm sure you guys have read some of these books, like Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone,
Oh, sure.
and Ben Sass's Them, and Charles Murray's Coming Apart. and Timothy Carney's Alienated America, these books that talk about the sort of crisis of loneliness and the crisis of despair that we're living through and the deaths of despair. I remember reading Ben Sass's book, and he was talking about the fact that when he cited the example of the heat wave that happened in Chicago, and the people who died in that heat wave were people that were alone. They were people that had no one to check on them. They had no social capital, cultural capital. They weren't coaching Little League. Their social, they didn't have very many social ties. There weren't people to come over and check on them. And I think that's what it feels like when you're reading a cyberpunk novel. It's the main character alone in his flat, and there's some kind of telly screen, and it's, he's ordering delivery, and it's just this lonely. Yeah. Anyways, it just feels like it speaks to a lot of the concerns that we've been seeing and that have been predicted by a lot of social scientists.
Yeah. This reminds me, since the comment section is also doing this, my story Gutter Ballet, people should read, is very cyberpunk. And also it's pretty isolated protagonist. He's a noir detective, so we'll bring it all together.
It's a good one.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. I wasn't fishing for that, but I was shamelessly plugging at the very least. Paul asked, we got into this in the last stream, I think.
Because I asked.
No, it was you, Liam. You did this. Is Blade Runner 1 or 2 better? I came down on the side of Blade Runner 2 by like a thin margin. I think it's like plotted better. Personally, but what about you guys?
Well, this week I just watched Blade Runner for the first time, which is how this came up last week.
Okay, so you haven't gotten to 2 yet.
No, so I really want to watch it because I like sci-fi films and I like good ones, and it looks good. I liked Blade Runner. Tears in Rain. Sorry, there's no the in there, I guess. So that was good, but no, it was a good. It's a good film. But I don't have any.
Yeah.
No opinion on 2049 as of yet.
We'll give it time. Jordan, what about you?
Yeah, I've recently seen both of these films, and I think I've seen Blade Runner probably 3 or 4 times, and I've seen the new one with Ryan Gosling a couple of times. I don't know. I'm leaning towards the first one. Maybe, I don't know, this could be prejudicial or it could be like my human limitations, but I could never seem to get through the new Blade Runner film. It's Blade Runner 2049, right?
Yeah.
I can never get through it in one sitting.
It's really long.
It's really long.
It's really long.
But there's something about the original Blade Runner film that is just, I think, more digestible. And again, it could be my nostalgia factor when I grew up, but something about Harrison Ford, he's just perfect for that role. And I don't know. I think I lean towards some of the images in that film. It's kind of a cliche at this point. They say that, it's only 3 hours long.
The second one.
They say that there are certain films. What did they say this about? They said this about Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal. It's Blade Runner, the original one, is one of those films that you can pause it anywhere and you could have it printed out as a kind of glossy color photo and you could put it on your wall. There's so many beautiful shots in that film, and it's such an evocative film. It's so brilliant as a work of, it's almost one of those Camille Paglia glittering images, just works of just astonishingly brilliant pop art.
This is the thing it definitely has over the second one, because the second one is a slave to the first one's vision, right? But at the same time, the second one is like, it's a lot,
and it's more cerebral, Christopher. It's just, it's Villeneuve. It's just so smart, and you have to really pay attention.
Yeah, you do, right? That's true.
Right? You can just drink a scotch and watch the original Blade Runner and just
I like the blimp, like this is cool. right? But like, the second one couldn't have the visual impact that the first one did. It just like it was never going to happen. And in a lot of ways, I think Villeneuve is a better director than Ridley Scott is.
Is that how you pronounce it? Villeneuve, you little snob.
He's French.
Villeneuve. Yeah, I think it's Villeneuve.
It is Villeneuve. It
yeah.
should be Villeneuve, but I don't understand.
I said Villeneuve, and then Christopher said right after Villeneuve.
I'm sorry, Jordan. But was it before the stream? No, it was during the stream. We were talking about how you were an elitist, so I had to pull rank.
I've always told Christopher he has like 10 IQ points on me, and it really goes the extra mile, and you can see it right there.
I don't think that's true, though.
How to pronounce French very specifically.
Yeah, but you've read like 800 billion books, and I've read like 500 billion times.
It just sounds so good coming out of your mouth. So
you just got to learn the French.
Rolls off the tongue.
I just watch more press about the Dune movies. That's my secret. I just wanted to see all of the stuff about Dune that I possibly could. Actually, what it really was watching all the like short. They did 3 like short films in the lead up to Blade Runner 2049 that like are on YouTube. They were not in the movie, so I wanted to watch those. So, and also which they were all great. There's one that like what's his name? Benedict Wong was in. He wasn't in the movie, but he was in the like extra scene they did. That was a good one. If you can handle Jared Leto, which I can, but most people are like, "What? Get this guy away from me! He's insane." I'm like, "He's an actor. It's fine. They all are." Jordan, you gotta run for president of the metaverse after that speech from earlier. You have an endorsement.
President of the highway of the metaverse in the metaverse is from Snow Crash, right? That's the Matrix is from Neuromancer. The metaverse is
from Snow Crash. Yeah.
Right. I'll run. I'll run if you'll support me, Paul.
I laughed so hard when Meta rebranded and decided they were going to call their metaverse the metaverse. It was like, oh, we're back. All right, Mafia Pizza time. Let me call my uncle. Let's go.
I think I'm going to do it, Paul. I know how to pronounce Villeneuve now. And so I feel like I'm ready for the run. So.
Yeah. The Chinese people laugh at the drone stuff. They don't obey it. That's like probably true. The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin. But that doesn't mean they don't try. Jenna is in the chat. She's reminded me that it was probably about time. I've been giving away hardcover copies of Empire of Silence. I have a few. Some people donated. I've been giving one away each stream. There are lots of ways. We have one more copy to give away next week. There are lots of ways to enter. If you just go to my website, it's allanempire.com, scroll over to the sweepstakes button on the far right. It'll tell you all about it. But for now, Jenna is going to send me the name, figure out who won this week. And let's see. Seth Krenwelch, if you are here, Seth, you have won. Congratulations. Please, let us know. And we'll get your copy to you. So congratulations, Seth. I think we probably send you an email too. Jenna's in charge of the sweepstakes. This is all her idea. I'm just letting her run with it. Seth, congratulations. Just shoot us an email. Let's see.
Congrats to Seth. Woohoo.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah, with the business there. Jenna just showed up, so I must obey. You gentlemen know how it works. Marriage is a matriarchal institution. That's why men invented the government. They had to get out of their house.
I've always put it differently, Christopher. It's the Gemeinschaft and the Gazelle Shaft. The Gemeinschaft, you can remember that by mine. It's mine. The Gemeinschaft is the realm of your family, your neighbors, your local community. You behave differently in the Gemeinschaft. The Gesellschaft, you can think of it as cell. That's the world of business, commerce, government. You don't treat your wife like you treat people in the Cassell shaft. You might lend your neighbor your car. You would never lend a stranger in the Cassell shaft your car. You don't know them. You don't treat them the same way. The Gemein shaft is very different. I'm a big softie in the Gemein shaft. In the Cassell shaft, I'm a real bastard. So,
Oh man, yeah, no, man, it's so true though. There's a very strong border between those, unlike
absolutely, and there should be.
yeah, unlike the border between Cyberpunk and anything else. Bring it back in, but yeah, no, there should be absolutely, but yeah, no. So sorry for the the shameless promotional stuff there in the middle of the stream, but let's see. Yeah, like Kelly, to get back to the Blade Runner point, of course, right? Blade Runner like is capital C cinema, right? But as an experience, I like the second movie better just because there's more stuff going on. Blade Runner, the first one's plot is like very, very thin. And I think the movie hangs together mostly on the basis of this fact that it is so iconic, right? And it is so beautiful. The Vangelis score is substantially better than the Hans Zimmer one in the second movie. Everybody loves Hans Zimmer. He's not my guy. The Vangelis score is way better, and the best part of the second movie is when it plays the actual Blade Runner theme for like 1 second right at the end. This is a problem I have with a lot of like modern franchise stuff. They like hide the themes. All the Star Wars TV shows are like, what John Williams music? I've never heard of him. And I'm just like, what is wrong with you? Like, that is the one part of Star Wars that is 100% all the time. Even in the terrible Disney movies, they brought him back for. And you're just getting rid of it. And they did the same thing with Blade Runner. They're like, we're not gonna play Vangelis. We're just gonna walk away.
You're on fire, Christopher. I'm looking at myself like in the camera, and I'm nodding in the way that Dwight Schrute nods next to Michael Scott when he's standing there like this, just assistant to the regional manager. Just
it's only because I've absorbed enough of your energy from earlier in the conversation.
I'm going to get whiplash from nodding my head. So
yeah, yeah, it's this is the aesthetics thing, though, right? Like Blade Runner 1 is aesthetically far more persuasive than Blade Runner 2 is. But it's the ideas, Jordan. It's the ideas.
that's true.
There's just like a lot. There's like a lot going on in the second movie, like plot wise, world building wise. In the first movie, doesn't have, and that's because it has like a bit of a different focus, right? We leave LA, we go to Vegas, right? We go to the scrapyard, where that like weird bug farm. So you got to have your bug farms, right? It's an inescapable. They're coming.
It's got a more expansive, less claustrophobic vibe too. When you go into a room and you meet Jared Leto, everything is high ceilings and it's expansive.
It's all it's very empty too. It's very brutalist in the way that his Dune movie is too.
That's
which
exactly
I think is
right.
Totally the wrong call for Dune.
Yep.
It actually, like, if I have one complaint about his Dune movies, like every room is huge and made out of Lego bricks and empty. It's like the library in Castle Caladan has one chair. Like, who's using this library?
Well, that's kind of how it is in Cyberpunk too. It's this like these gigantic, like, I don't know, like what's the rent on this gigantic building that you're like?
Right, the Tyrell Corporation Dune pyramid. Yeah. I mean, they make all the replicants, right? So it's got to be enough money. This is like this is one point with science fiction writers that I just don't get. Like, a lot of cyberpunk presupposes that like explicit slavery, right, will become fashionable and like allowed in 2019.
Right.
Like, it's not going to happen. Now, is it going to happen, in like subtler, explicitly criminal ways? Yes, right.
Well, right. It'll be like Snow Crash, where it's like live in the pod, eat the bug, you will own nothing, and you will be happy. Like literally in Snow Crash, they're living in you store it containers. And that's kind of accurate. Have you been to New York City?
Sure.
There are like 3 people living in a tiny, like, what do you call those apartments? Studio apartments, right? And they're the size of, people are renting out their walk-in closets. And people are sleeping in other people's walk-in closets. And, I know, because I literally can't afford to live in Boston. I have to live in, I can't afford to live in the town that I work in. And so, like, yeah, it's not slavery. Obviously, that would be a uncouth comparison. But there's a discussion to be had about like wage slavery and you know uh, serfdom and
Sure.
forms of you write about this stuff in Empire of Silence so persuasively.
You brought it back around. Yeah, no, I mean, like, feudalism's back, baby. Only the feudal lords don't owe you anything. Right? Everyone's so hard on those dark ages, right? But actually, like, the guy who lived in the big fancy house was expected to put on the armor and stand in front of you. And if he didn't, he was evil, and you should murder him. Because it wouldn't be murder; it would be, there's I can't remember what the other point is, but Aquinas makes a distinction between insurrection, I think, in revolution. And I think one of those is like unjustified, and the other one is like, bro, the king sucks. Like, yeah, no, I would like much rather be a medieval peasant than like live in New York now.
Then live in the euphoric container in one of those burb claves, and you've got your like. What is it that they wear, these like metaverse like headsets?
Yeah.
What do they call them in Snow Crash?
Isn't it just a headset or goggles or something?
You're living in a storage container, and your existence is so miserable that you have to have a second life, and you have to buy property in your second life metaverse. It's too real, man. I feel it.
Yeah, well, people always come away from these books with the wrong ideas, right? And they create Second Life. You're like, guys, that's not like, that wasn't the point. The problem with Snow Crash, right? Which I love. The problem with Snow Crash is it's like too cool, right? For people to come away with, for it to like effectively be any kind of critique. I love that book because it is awesome, right? I want to drive my pizza Batmobile and get in sword fights with people over the tip. That is a much more exciting world, right, than just working for Domino's, right? I would much rather drive pizza for the mafia in a Batmobile with a katana. That's too cool, Neil Stevenson, for anybody to come away from that book with anything other than, this is dope.
That's a messy book. I mean, I love it too, Christopher. Like, the first 150 pages are like, what am I reading? Holy crap, this is really cool. And then, man, that book is just a mess. It needs to have about 80 pages cut out of it. It's got so many cool philosophical and linguistic. It asks this question about like linguistic universalism versus linguistic relativism, and ideas spreading like memes and all of this really cool stuff. But it's also a mess of a book, man.
I think actually it probably should be two books. Like, I think it should either be pulled apart and like made into a series. Like, I think it's too short.
Some of those action scenes are just impossible to follow. I mean, he's got some issues as a writer. I've never been fully on board with Neil Stevenson. My wife actually just read his most recent book about climate change, and my wife is literally an environmental scientist. She's a climate scientist. She's someone who like studies the issue for a living. And it was hard for her to read that book because it was just so bogged down in some places with details that mucked up the plot. And in other places, she just had a really hard time with the storytelling and the narrative and the structure. I feel like he's a brilliant guy and a truly sort of profound thinker, but I don't know if he's the greatest storyteller, Christopher. What do you think?
I think that's a pretty fair critique, right? I'm not gonna say that like I'm a better writer or anything crazy.
You are though, like you don't have these problems.
But I also I think his his ambition in terms of idea and scope of idea is in a lot of ways maybe not greater, certainly way more granular. I think the thing I like about his books is they are just idea, and like maybe they don't like all cohere sometimes, but you can come away with any 12 of those ideas and be like really excited by and moved by them, right? In certain ways, right?
He could just write an essay though. So sometimes I feel like I'm trying to like
Yeah, but
follow some of
aesthetics are
these
more
actions.
persuasive, Jordan.
Yeah,
right?
I know. I know.
You know, like you have to actually, you know, hide your essay about, you know, geometry in a book about monks fighting aliens that aren't aliens, and then people will like read it and stuff. You know, I have a friend who wanted to get a PhD in medieval studies, and like you know, as you know, I'm like, please do not collect more student loan debt. Like, do not let them trick you. But I was like, look, man, if you like want people to ask your, you know, for your input about the Middle Ages, like just write a fantasy novel. All right, people will assume that you have expertise that you do not formally have. And the good thing about you, my friend, right, is that you have more expertise than most of the people who write fantasy novels. All right, you're not gonna you know, convince people that like the Byzantine Empire didn't exist. You know, which like is a huge thing about the Middle Ages people forget about, right? Or whatever, right? You're not going to convince, you know, you're not going to convince people that everybody wore brown and like shat in the street all the time, right? Like you're not going to convince them that's true because you know better. Right? So like go write a fantasy book and people will assume you have a PhD. My first book signing, all right, the person who was like introducing me was like, and he got a master's degree from NC State, and no, I did not, but thank you, right? Like I did now. All of the MFAs are crying, you know, they don't have their book contracts, and here I am, you know, being accredited the thing they paid for, but or maybe didn't pay for. Sometimes school does, but you know, aesthetics are more persuasive. Like that is, you know, like that is why you should do the stuff as a novel, and it's for that reason. Like I don't, you know, if I had to pick one of the cyberpunk writers I like the best, it's still Stevenson for that book. Like it's a mess. Is it like superior to Neuromancer as art? Like no, but like it's way more fun. Neuromancer is you know, it's not dull, but like it's kind of a grind sometimes to get through stuff.
Dense.
It's really dense, but it's like it's also it's not cool in the same way. Like it's got some cool stuff, but it's not as cool as pizza delivery Batmobiles and, you know, people trading sniper fire over like who gets to run in intersections, traffic light patterns. Like, I'm sorry, that sounds awesome. Like if I don't like a stoplight, I can just go take control of it. That's great. Like,
Or you could just grapple onto cars and just, you know,
right, and skateboard around. Like
skateboard around.
I thought about that frequently as a kid when I was coming back from the pool in my neighborhood. I'm like, I don't want to walk all this way. I'm like way too like not the kid that has an A in gym class. You know, I'll just grab onto this car in my, you know, on the skateboard that I do not own because I am, you know, 3 feet tall. Yeah. Anyway, no, you're right though. The book's a mess. But it is a glorious mess, and I love it.
Yeah.
Moid almost, I think, booted me from our recording when I listed it in my like top 10 science fiction books, which I might not do today if he asked again. You know, it's so hard for me to put a list together, but like I really like that book. It's fun. But it is a glorious mess. That's for sure.
I need to read that one still.
It's just kind of bananas. It's also the book we get the word avatar from in a digital context. Obviously, it's a Sanskrit word, right? But
it also like predates. It kind of predicts Google Earth and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's you know, it's ahead of its time in weird ways, and like behind it in others. Right, the Soviet Union fell like 2 years after it was published, but you know that was a surprise plot twist.
Yeah, well, that happens in Neuromancer too, right? The Soviet Union's still around, but the United States is not.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, it's just you know, it's funny the things that people just don't get right.
No one gets that right. I mean, you read 1984 and the whole like post World War II, you know, his whole like global realignment like vision of how that was going to work was just totally wrong. But you know,
yeah. This is one of the, but then he's like right about a lot of other things, right? We're talking about 1984 earlier, right? And the, it's not really cyberpunk, but if we were to draw the elements from that book that are totally around today, like sure, right, you can point the telescreens and everybody does, but like far more, I think pernicious is the fact that all the proles in 1984 are like hooked on drugs and booze and pornography all the time. And what's so suspicious about that is that because people talk about 1984 every single day, nobody talks about the element where all the poor people are just watching porn all the time. Like,
and
nobody talks
doing
about that.
scratch off lotto tickets and drinking gin all day long and
Right.
and betting on sports and freaking out over the next newest little gadget or whatever. Yeah, like the other thing in 1984 that people don't talk enough about is there's this notion of, and you see this in all like totalitarian countries, where there's this sense that everyone knows what's true, but everyone's afraid to say it. And there's this brilliant moment in 1984 where he says, no, listen, like if the regime says 2 + 2 = 5, then 2 + 2 = 5. And everyone knows that to switch on a dime, that we are at war with East Asia, right? We are at war with East Asia now. Okay. And we were always at war with East Asia, and 2 + 2 = 5. And yet Orwell says, when we're making guns in the factories, 2 + 2 has to equal 4. So when we're in the factory and when we're building bridges, if 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, then the bridges fall down and they don't work. So 2 + 2, and everyone knows that 2 + 2 = 4. When it comes to bedrock fundamental reality, we all effing know. And then we go out in public and we say that 2 + 2 = 5, because that's the thing we're supposed to say in public. And it's like, can anyone think of any parallels to that? So like he was totally right about that. There's just these things that we just know are absolutely fundamentally ridiculous that we have to pretend that we all believe in public. And like when it actually matters, we can selectively apply what we all know to be the real truth when it really matters. And he got that dead on, man.
Oh yeah. No, I'm not trying to diminish anything, right? But it's interesting which elements of these books, right, are sort of advanced, like because they teach it in school, right? Which is like I'm sure you do, right?
I do. I teach it.
And yet, right, there are elements that like they are not on the curriculum, which I find very interesting. Yeah. Right? It's they'll emphasize perhaps the punk element and not the cyber element, let's say. To put it in a sentence, right? Which is maybe too kitschy, but like get the point, right? Like, it's funny, right? Neo was working for the machines the whole time, actually, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Well, the chat seems to have died. So we reached the end. Although Mark here is saying that he bumper hitched in the winter as a kid. But did you use a grappling gun, Mark? See, that's what I want. I want the grappling gun.
That's pretty sweet
in me. So, yeah. Well, gentlemen, it's been 2 hours anyway. So why don't we start wrapping things down? You want to tell the audience where they can find you? Well, I put links, by the way, in the description to
go ahead, Liam.
Channels.
Right. Yeah. Well, I did one last thought. I guess that it's just so I think in tangents apparently, and I am like terrible on thinking on the spot and of adding to conversation. So, but I did remember though that there's a novel Central Station by Lavi Tidar, which is like technically cyberpunk. I read that this year. I really enjoyed that. It has vampires in it, which is dope. And they're data vampires. But it's still dope. Anyways, but yeah, you can find me on YouTube. Here, I think you put me in the description. Right. So I make videos at Liam's Lyceum. I make an obnoxious amount of videos. I make 5 a week, maybe 6 if I feel like it. And that's reviews, spoiler-free reviews, which you could argue are useless. But I'm reading a lot of books that a lot of people don't talk about on YouTube. So I come out with reviews on Monday and Friday. I do a weekly update on Saturday. I come out with a poetry video on Thursdays, and I just come out with whatever the hell I want to talk about on Wednesdays. I write a little bit you can find me at liamqthall.com, and you'll find my tiny like bibliography, essentially. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, that just yeah.
Okay, yeah, like my YouTube channel is iWizard. When I'm not talking about Christopher Ruocchio's wonderful books, I'm if you enjoyed any of these rambling, obnoxious pontifications, I'll be doing that on my channel as well, and so you can come check that out. Thanks for having us, Christopher.
No, thanks for coming, guys. And I still owe you one more Gene Wolfe video, right, Jordan?
I know, man. And the
It's
problem
been like-
is that I didn't read the book that I was supposed to read to have that discussion. So that's just totally on me. Like, we did the first 2 Gene Wolfe books, then we had a discussion about the second 2, and then I just didn't read. What was it I was supposed to read?
Earth of the New Sun.
Earth of the New Sun.
Sort of sequel one, yeah.
I was just overwhelmed at that point in time in my life, so we still have to do that, I guess.
Yeah. I just realized that that is the case. There are a couple sort of like epilogue questions that got floated in here. One, Dominique asks, "Are these streams going to be posted?" Yes, 100%. They'll be up just as soon as we're done streaming. Jack asks me, "Am I going to do another sort of Planet anthology?" Probably not. I would like to, honestly, but I don't work at Bain anymore as an editor, and I could maybe do an anthology as on like a freelance basis, but it's like it's that or write book 7 at this point, and I think everybody would rather I do book 7. So
I do
maybe at
Sword
some
and
point in the
Planet with
future,
you.
I'll get back on that. What's that?
Said I'd do Sword and Planet with you.
Oh yeah,
That's
well,
right.
we'll talk to Liam. Maybe Liam will do Sword and Planet too. Electric Boogaloo. But yeah, no, not for the foreseeable future. I may get back into the anthology game one day. Yes, in with Melodrama Punk. And last question from Wheeler's pupil, off topic. What are your guys' thoughts on Solar Punk? You guys have any thoughts on Solar Punk?
I don't even know what Solar Punk is, but why don't I say one last thing about Cyberpunk that I forgot to say earlier? Because when you asked me to do this stream, I was thinking about something that I noticed about Cyberpunk that I think is worth mentioning. I would say traditionally, sci-fi novels, space opera, hard science fiction have a lot to do with the way that traditionally science fiction has always treated technology as a set of usable tools, right? Robots, spaceships, communications technology. And one of the, I think, important contributions of Cyberpunk is it focuses on how people are no longer changing technology, that technology is beginning to change us, our governments, our homes, our workplaces, our memories, our very consciousness. And so that's another thing that I don't think we mentioned, but I think is really important about the genre. I don't know what solar punk is. There's so many punks now. 2 novels get written that are just a little bit different than cyberpunk, and it becomes like a different punk thing. So I don't know what that even. Can someone tell me what solar punk is? Like,
I imagine that it's like cyberpunk, but all the technology is green. That would be my guess. I don't honestly know to answer the question. My only thought about solar punk is sort of general, right? And that's that like all of these extra punk genres are a symptom of like the overproduction of sort of just of pulp material. Like there's just so much stuff that's getting pumped out, right? Even in traditional publishing, but certainly over on the indie scene. And no respect to my indie brothers and sisters, but like a lot of it's not good, right? A lot of traditional publishing is not good either. But like the barrier to entry has never been lower, right? So I think that the tendency to just sort of like create these new little genres, so there are new smaller categories that you can say you're the number one seller in, is a big driver. But Belemery says it's basically it's about sustainability and like green technology.
the explosion of punks reminds me of nuts. It's like nuts, Christopher. when you go to Europe, when you go to, I did a trip with my wife to Ireland, England, and Scotland, and you go to a grocery store and you go into the aisle where they have the nuts, and they have like two types of nuts. And then you go to a grocery store in America and you go into the aisle with the nuts. And they have habanero nuts, they have sweet chili barbecue nuts, they have salted nuts. They have 147 different types of nuts. Smoked, barbecue, sweet chili, hot sauce, sriracha, whatever. It couldn't be more different. Seriously, go to any grocery store anywhere in Europe, and they will go to the chip aisle. They will have 2 bags of chips, two brands of chips. In America, there are 3 aisles filled with chips, and there are 560 different types of chips. And most of them are disgusting. Okay, so this metaphor is going awry, but
Yeah.
I think you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, this is something that Kevin J. Anderson said to me. We were talking about metal music, actually, because he has not dissimilar tastes in music to my own. And he was talking about how he was listening to a lot of what did he call them? It was like I'm listening to like a lot of like goth chick metal or something like that. It was goth metal music with female vocalists, right? He's like, and the great thing about being alive now is that I can only listen to that indefinitely. Right, like I don't have to listen to anything else. I know what my like very targeted, specific, brand is. Right, and now with chips, I'm like super sympathetic to this. Right, but the problem in art is that if there are 500 flavors of chips and those chips are genres, then nobody has anything in common anymore because nobody's reading everything. And I have a couple of friends who were capital F fans back when. To be a science fiction fan, it meant you read all of the pulps, right? These are like guys in their 70s, 80s, right? You read all the pulps, right? You read every book that came out because you could. And so everybody was talking, right? They had about everything, all right? They knew what every book was, which ones were good, which ones were bad, and why which ones that were bad, right? And vice versa, right? You can't do that anymore. And so I think that really the success of, let's say, geek culture, right, has largely been its own enemy in the sense that there is no such thing as geek culture anymore, right? If all you want to do is read Cyberpunk, you could just read Cyberpunk, right? And you can read kinds of Cyberpunk. You could read a habanero Cyberpunk or smoked Cyberpunk, right? Or salted, roasted, or unsalted, roasted, or unsalted, unroasted Cyberpunk, right?
Wasabi Cyberpunk.
Wasabi Cyberpunk, right? Which is redundant. You don't have to read anything else. And so if you have a friend who's also, a nerd, right? Also a fan, they might not read that and they might never read that. And so actually you're not friends anymore because you just don't have anything to talk about.
They just read Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, right. With the exception of a couple like really giant names.
Yeah.
And that's the position that we're like sort of in now, with the genre period, like, beyond the confines of just cyberpunk. This is a science fiction fantasy problem. This is a geek problem.
It's a glut. Even like Sword and Sorcery is getting there.
It's too big. Everything is too big for anybody's attention span to take it in. And this is,
and you're the Sword and Sorcery master, Liam.
I can't read it all. There's too much.
It's incredible though. Like Liam was like touting his channel a little bit. You really should subscribe to Liam's channel because he's got great taste and he just reads so much and puts out so many videos. So I have to like compliment you on that, man. You are a beast on that front.
Thank you. Hopefully it's useful to someone.
Yeah. It's really good stuff.
Jack was
confused.
wrong. I think Liam was saying there's just so much sword and sorcery now, and it used to be kind of a small genre. Yeah.
I mean, it's probably a similar problem to like the 70s, 80s. I just hope it doesn't crash and just become a bunch of clonins, which is kind of what happened last time. A new Conan story did come out today, by the way. That is not cyberpunk related at all, and it's a short story, as it should be, though. So
I have a question: is it by Brian Anderson?
No, but I think there's a lot of ones that are actually coming out in the next like couple weeks. I think.
Yeah,
It's
I
by,
read Brian Anderson's. He
Oh, really?
Yeah, he had me sort of beta read it.
Nice.
Brian's a friend.
It's by like Stephen Graham Jones or something.
Gotcha. Yeah, not the one I read. Then yeah, they're doing new Conan anthologies. I tried to get in on that, but that did not that did not go anywhere. So, yeah. Well, Mark, you want to read a Ruocchio cyberpunk novel? Can I recommend Howling Dark, which is the second Sun Eater book, which is out in trade paperback today. It's not really a cyberpunk novel, but it has grace notes of cyberpunk, right? I'm going to turn into a genre sommelier. But yes, there's some of that there. But anyway, that was a protracted epilogue. You know, I had everyone say goodbye, and we're still here. This has been my most chaotic stream between Robo Jordan from the
My
beginning.
fault, totally my fault. No one's gonna subscribe to my channel because I can't even use technology at all.
They
I'm
should though,
sorry
because
about
Jordan
that.
actually edits his videos and does not simply produce live streams like me. Because I am not a YouTuber. As you
That
can
just
tell
makes
by
you
my
more
lighting.
real and authentic. We were talking about authenticity and individualism. That's just, I mean, you're just a
Yeah,
21st
I
century
am a
man,
cyberpunk
Christopher.
hero.
Down
Obviously.
with conformity, man.
Yeah, which and just to reinforce finally the dystopian nature of our world, I'm going to end by sort of teasing a thing that I'm going to be shilling shortly. We just got the proofs in. We're doing these House Marlowe pins, so I've been holding it the whole time. So everybody keep your eye out for those in the near future. So we're sponsored by me. We'll get the logo to play now. But guys, thanks again. Thanks again for coming on. It's good to talk to you both. It's been too long. So I will hopefully we'll see you guys again soon. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay well.